guys, it's Allycat, and I am so happy to see you back. So, I've had one of those kind of days where everything just kind of went wrong. I have been working nonstop on this camera equipment, and apparently you need micro USB cords and these weird cards and all this weird stuff. I'm getting there. I am getting there. But I'm not quite there. So I'm using a webcam. I don't know if it looks any different, but hey, I got this. And then I had problems with the audio, so hopefully I won't record this entire thing and then it just not have audio because I might cry. So I didn't know how I was going to do the intro to this video because I felt very strongly about it. I didn't want people to think that it was funny because the material that we're going to talk about today is very serious and should be taken serious, and I just want to go about this appropriately. In the beginning, I thought, maybe I should do makeup and talk about true crime, but I don't feel right about that. I feel like it just doesn't go together. These are real people, and I guess we're gonna have to take it one step at a time. So obviously you know that this is my first big video that I've been working on for a very, very long time. I have been researching this case for, I would have to say about 2 months now. I thought, there's not a lot of information on it, but there is so much information on it, and I just, it became my life, and I didn't know where to start, and I didn't know how to explain it. So we're just going to jump right into it. So this is Detroit Allycat, and let's get spooky. So today we're going to talk about something that made national headlines in the year of 2018. They called it the Turpin 13 and the House of Horrors in California. I could not believe some of the things that I saw, and I immediately was very interested in the case. I am going to put out a disclaimer right now. If child abuse bothers you, or violence or neglect bothers you and you cannot handle it, that this is not a good video to watch. There are some things that are disturbing, including what I would consider borderline sexual assault. So I just want to put that out there before we begin. Let's start with how it began. January 14th, 2018, there was a girl. Her name was Jordan Turpin. She was 17 years old, and she decided to jump out of her window with one of her siblings. She had with her a phone that had been disconnected. It no longer had service. But the thing about disconnected phones is that you can always call them and use them for 911, and you can also connect them to Wi-Fi and still go online and do stuff like that if you have Wi-Fi. So she had this phone, and she jumped out of her window, and it was found out that she actually had been planning this for 2 years. She went out with her sister, and I don't know where they ran. They ran as far as they could. Her sister actually ended up getting very scared and left, but Jordan continued. They do have the actual recording of the 911 call that she did, and this 911 call actually is what really pushed me into this case. First off, Jordan is 17 years old, and she sounds like a 10-year-old on the phone. Her voice is so sweet and it's so innocent sounding. It's a very high-pitched sound. And she calls and she basically says, my brothers and sisters are being abused and there are 13 of us, and 3 of them are chained up. And you can hear like the actual shock in the 911, person that they're talking to. And they're like, well, where do you live? And she's like, I don't know where I live. We don't go out very much. I don't know what the street names are. And so the 911 caller is basically talking to this girl, trying to get more and more information. And she's like, well, tell me more about what's going on. And she says, my house is very, very filthy, and it's so filthy that it's hard to sleep at night. And she goes, well, what about your mother? And she goes, my mother doesn't really like us very much, and she doesn't spend a lot of time with us. So at this time, I guess they found Jordan Turpin, and the police found her. And they got Jordan Turpin to take her to the house. And they have footage of this too. The police officers actually got to the house and came in. And while they went into the house, the mother was trying to still unchain one of the children. And what they found was... it was just shocking. And there's footage of the neighbors as they walk each of the kids out of the house. They're all wearing like their nightgowns, and they look all very, very scared and so pale and tiny. And they found out that everything Jordan said was true. They were all very badly malnutritioned. Some of her sisters and brothers had been chained to their beds for so long that when they had to use a bathroom, they couldn't go to the bathroom. They just basically went to the bathroom where they were. And it was really, really sad state of affairs. There were 13 children, and the ages ranged from 2 to 29. Now, this is where it gets a little bit crazy. Only 7 of the children were under the age of 18. So the rest of the children, and I'm calling them children, they were over 18 years old. And the oldest was 29 years old. But the 29-year-old was actually 82 pounds because she had been so severely malnourished. And what actually was very sad was that when this group was taken away, they were taken straight to the hospital. The minors were sent to one hospital and the adults were sent to the other. 2 of the children, because they had been malnourished their entire lives, they could never have children. Their body just didn't grow correctly. I believe they said it was a form of dwarfism that happened because of this. Don't quote me on the exact medical diagnosis. I just know that they will never have children again. So how does something like this happen? They found this family in an area it was a city called Paris, California. And if you know much about Paris, California, it's very close to Los Angeles. So this isn't like you have a family like hiding in the woods or the country where you can't see them. This is like right in front of your face. And some of the things that I found out about this case, it just like completely shocked me because there were like warning signs. And if there was ever a reason for me to want to talk about stuff like this, is because I want to educate people on what the signs of child abuse are and what can happen if you don't call. It's very important that if you see something that doesn't seem right, that you tell somebody. And I know that's hard for a lot of people because people feel like, I just want to go ahead and ignore, I want to stay in my own lane and I don't want to get in anybody's business. But the thing is that a lot of times, what are you going to do by making a phone call? There's going to be somebody that goes out there and checks on them, and if nothing's wrong, nothing's wrong. But if something is wrong, you could save a life. And it's so very important that you see these types of red flags. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about the case and where it started and all the different parts of it and where it ended and all the things that happened, because there's a lot. Actually, I was like, I didn't know if I wanted to take this case on as my first case that I ever did, but little Jordan Turpin, she I researched her the most because she just really I couldn't believe how brave she was. The thing is that when you live with somebody that abuses you for so long, you begin to assimilate to them, and it becomes easier and easier for you not to go tell somebody. But she broke free and she did it regardless. The thing is that she also, when she had the phone, she started her own Instagram and YouTube, and her Instagram and YouTube was called Lacey Swan. Let me make sure I got that name right. It was Lacey Swan 7429, and I of course went and watched it, and she's just got this. First off, she's beautiful. If she would have led a regular life, and I hope that she gets to lead a regular life, she probably would have been a model or something. But she goes and she makes these songs, and she sings, and she has this keyboard and she plays it. And the thing that is really sad is all the songs are why did you take away the key? What did I do? I'm going to get away. It's just, I don't know, it was really sad. And on her Instagram, which is still up, they didn't take it down, she has pictures of foxes, and she posts bits and pieces of her life, and you can actually see that her life was so hard, but she managed to make good out of it. And I felt like her story should be told. I guess a lot of people have heard of her story, but I didn't really hear of this story. So when I found it, I was like, whoa. So there were the adults, David Turpin and Louisa Ann Turpin. David Turpin was 57 years old, and Louisa Ann Turpin is 49 years old. And something to know is that they come from a very Pentecostal background. And when Louisa was 16 years old, David Turpin went up to her high school, signed her out of school, and basically, I can't say abducted because she went with him willingly, but took her and was like, we're gonna go get married. So from the very beginning, it was kind of a relationship that was a little off, if you know what I mean. So he took her and he married her, and she was very young and she was very innocent. But Louisa had a very interesting background as well. Louisa has 2 sisters and a half-brother, and there are a lot of interviews of her family members, and I don't know if they're getting some monetary value from this or what, but they seem to have hit every single, like, they're on Dr. Phil, they're on, like, different CNN, all these different things. And you know what? If they want to get this story out, that's great. But it seems there's something there. So one of the sisters talks about Louisa and her other sister and her mother, how when they were young children, her mother used to take them to a rich family member. And they use the word rich, but I wouldn't call the person rich. And the mother would drop the girls off, and the family member would molest the girls, and then the family member would give money to the mother, and then they would give money to the little girls as well. And I have seen so many different interviews about this, and the last interview I saw, she actually comes out and says it was her grandfather. So it was actually Louisa's grandfather and her mother's father who, I guess, raped and molested them and paid for that. And I guess when the girls would ask their mother, like, please don't take me over there, she would be like, I have to pay for you guys. You guys need food to eat, and we need money to live. And it was very traumatizing, and they talk about how that affected everything and how that affected Louisa, which I could see that doing some very traumatic things to them. I wouldn't necessarily use that as an excuse to torture and do what she did to her 13 children, but that is in the past. There was a lot in the interviews, if they couldn't decide who was in control of the relationship. Was it David? Was it Louisa? And when you hear the relatives talk about it, they say that it was definitely, they couldn't make up their mind. They say that Louisa was always in control, but David was always in the background, like, watching everything. And I feel like, my personal feelings is that Louisa was doing everything David wanted her to. I'm not going to say it's all David's fault, because that is definitely not all on one person, but I feel like there was, like, you know, she wanted to do things to make him happy. At least that's the impression that I got. And before we move on to the next part of the story, it's important to make mention to the fact that David actually has a brother. I think he has another sibling too, but they only made mention to the brother. And the reason they made mention to the brother was he is a Pentecostal preacher, and he called them and he said he wanted to adopt the children when they found out that these children had been taken away from them. And the authorities were like, we don't really want to talk about the adoption. We want to talk about if you knew what was happening, because there were pictures of their families together. So it was kind of hard for them to understand, like, how could you have been around them and not known this was going on? And it was also noted that both sisters and the brothers, she had a stepbrother named Billy, they all had talked about, like, you know, I want to go ahead and adopt these kids. And they were all talking about, like, I want 3 of them, and I want 3 of them. None of the kids went to the family. I don't know what that means or what that's for. Personally, I think that the counselors and the doctors and everybody who took care of these kids thought that it was probably best for them to take like a clean break from the family. And that's really sad, you know, because they'll never be able to see their aunt or their uncle, or I think they might be able to see them, but it's not like we're all in the same family anymore. It just is, it's a very complicated. So they actually had 6 different homes that were mentioned. The first place that Louisa and David Turpin lived was in Fort Worth, Texas, where he had a job as an engineer. Then he moved someplace in California, and from there they moved to Rio Vista, that's in Texas as well. And then they moved, I believe it was Paris, California. There might have been one other place, but I'm not sure. But Paris, California is actually where they found them and where the children were taken away from them. And the thing about David Turpin and Louisa Turpin, David always had like a really good job. Like, we're talking, the houses were $300,000 houses, and the lifestyle that they lived were, I would say, a little bit above average. So I don't understand, like, with the malnutrition and not feeding the kids, like, why that was done, because they had money. The kids were basically slaves for them all their lives. Something else that was really interesting was that the kids were all dressed in the same outfits when they went on outings. And they did go on outings, which is very, very bizarre, because they went on multiple trips to Disneyland. I guess Louisa was really obsessed with Disneyland. So in the beginning, they would take them to Disneyland. And when you see the pictures of them at Disneyland, they're like all wearing the same outfits. And it's kind of crazy. And they said in the beginning of all this, like in the first 10 years, they would actually fly their family to their homes and take them to Disneyland with them. And like the family were really excited because they got to see the kids, and you know, because Louisa and David paid for everything, it was like a real treat for them. And they said that they thought that Louisa was the one that made it out of the family and who had gotten anything she wanted and basically made it and had a beautiful life. So nobody really knew anything. It was later on when they moved from their first house that, you know, there were mentioned, the family members started mentioning, like, you know, the kids are really small, like, is everything going okay? And they said that, you know, they used to do Skype, and when those comments started being made, there was no longer any Skype, and the trips stopped for the family, so they never got to see them, and they just started having phone calls. When they were living in Texas, that actually, there's a lot that I found out about the Texas in Rio Vista. So they bought a house in Rio Vista, and the neighbors that lived next to them, they were like super excited because they had a daughter, which was one of like the other daughter's age, and they thought, oh wow, our daughter's gonna have a kid. And they started to notice some very interesting things that were happening there. So there was a house, and the kids would go outside, and the first thing that was mentioned was the mom noticed that their hands were kind of white, and she thought that they were wearing gloves. And so the mom, the neighbor mom, asked them like, hey, you know, what's going on with your hands? And she's like, the kid answered like, you can't wash your hands above your wrist or you're wasting water. So they were basically so dirty that their hands were crusted with dirt. Their hands and bodies were so dirty that when they washed their hands, it looked like they were wearing white gloves, and the rest of their body actually looked like it had clothes on. Because I guess they could only wash their hands. And it was also said that they were only allowed to take a shower once a year, which is pretty intense for 13 kids. So here's where a little bit of some weirder stuff happened. Around that time, one of the children was starting to get picked on in school, and so they decided that they were going to homeschool the kids. So they had their own school, and David like registered and everything. I don't know, it was like this Seashore school or whatever. And the reason why the child was getting picked on in the public school is because all the kids were noticing, like, you know, she smelled bad, and her hair was like tied up with like what did they say? They said it was a candy wrapper. So her hair was in a ponytail with a candy wrapper. And you know how kids are. You're going to smell bad and you don't look clean. That's the first thing they're going to do, is they're going to make fun of them. And that is a real red flag for people that work in the school system, like children that are not washed or bathed properly, or just there's just things that don't stand out right. That typically is one of the first things that you notice, is that their hygiene isn't right. But it kind of is like it's like a weird toss up, because you know kids, they can be dirty, but when you see a child with their hair tied up in a ponytail with an empty candy wrapper, that's kind of strange. So they had the house, and then the mother, the neighbor mother, came over and she was asking the kids their names, and the kids were not allowed to tell the neighbor mother her names. And something else to be noticed is all of these kids, all 13 of them, they all had their names all started with the letter or J. All their names started with the letter J. So there was Jordan and Jesse and Joseph and all the other, Jennifer. They were all J, which I think is kind of weird. And so I guess the house got so bad and so filled with garbage, because I think Louisa was a hoarder. I don't think she threw away garbage. There's pictures of the houses where the garbage is like literally like 2.5 feet off the ground. I don't know how anybody can walk around in that kind of a situation. It's really disgusting, and it just is, it makes no sense. And especially with babies. But, yeah, so they filled the house with all this garbage, trashed it, looked horrible. They also had evidence that the kids were living in closets, and there was a ventilation system in one of the closets. And at that time, they decided to go ahead and buy a double wide, and they put the double wide behind the house in Texas. So they moved out of the house that they trashed so bad and lived in the double wide, and then they trashed that one so bad, that's when they moved away from Texas. But there was something that happened in Texas that I thought was really crazy. So Louisa had 2 more babies while they were in Texas. So David and Louisa took the children, and they took the 2 babies that they had, and they got an apartment in downtown Texas, Rio Vista, and they told the oldest daughter, Jennifer, like, hey, okay, now you need to take care of all the kids, and we're gonna live in this apartment. Like, okay. So they leave these kids there, and I guess they came back every couple weeks and gave them food and stuff, but like they left their entire family there and raised the babies in an apartment. So also, when they were living in Texas, Jennifer, the oldest one, she actually made an escape for it. So she left, and she was caught like 3 miles down the road, and somebody pulled over and saw her, and they picked her up, and she was like, well, how do I get a job, and how do I get a car? And because Jennifer was so malnourished, they didn't realize that she was 18 years old. They thought that she was like a little girl. So they're like, where's your mommy? And Jennifer told her where she was, and they took her back. And within a few weeks of that, in the middle of the night, the Turpins actually moved, and they left all their garbage. I guess they left dead animals. They left everything. The neighbors, of course, came into the house and wanted to see what was inside the houses, and they said that they had saw ropes tied to the beds. And I believe that's where they started to like tie up the kids to the beds. So they ended up going to California, and there's so much. There's so much. So when they were living in California, Louisa's sister actually came and stayed with them. And I guess what would happen was Luisa's sister would go take a shower, and Luisa would open up the door while her sister was showering and let her husband David come in and watch her, and they would make her sister get out of the shower while she was naked and like stand there in front of David, and then Luisa would laugh and be like, "Oh, ha ha, look at your face is all red." Creepy. So, also, before we move away from Texas, I guess in Texas, Luisa decided that she was going to become promiscuously wild, and this is because her and David decided that they wanted to do that because she had married him at such a young age. So they got a hotel room, and she basically met a man at a bar and went to this hotel room and slept with this man in the room. And she asked the man, like, "Can I record this for my husband?" And he was like, "Okay." So she records it, plays it for David, and 1 year ago, after that happened to the day, they go back to the hotel, and David and Luisa sleep in the same bed in the same hotel room. Which, I'm not against kink, but that's just kind of weird. Just a little weird. Really, really weird. I don't know. Each to their own, unless it involves kids. So let's go back. Now they've moved in the night where the neighbors couldn't see them. They just left the house for clothes, double wide, the trashed house. I guess it was like in such a state. There's so many pictures. They moved to California. And this is where things get really, really, really bad. They start chaining up the kids to the tables, or they start chaining up the kids to the beds. They're basically feeding them once a day, and Luisa had her whole like system on how to feed the kids. So when they fed the kids, which was like half a bologna sandwich, they had to come in to the table one by one, look at Luisa, smile at her. Luisa had to say, "You can sit down." They sat down, and then she would say, "Okay, you can eat," and then they would eat, and then she would say, "Okay, you can leave now," and like the kids were not allowed to talk, they were not allowed to do anything, they just smiled, and they did that one by one every day, 13 of them. So I don't even know. Also, when the police came into the house of the Turpin 13, they found Mountain Dew, and Luisa and David explained it as, David had to drink Mountain Dew because he worked so many hours that he would pass out and he got into a car accident. So the kids were not allowed to drink the Mountain Dew, but David was allowed to drink the Mountain Dew. And some of the abuse that the kids went through is that they would buy, I guess, these toys, and they would keep them in the packaging, and the kids were never allowed to open them. So there would be toys, but they weren't allowed to play with them. I saw the pictures of the house, and there were toys in there that they played with. So I don't know exactly what happened, but there were definitely unopened toys. Also, another thing that David and Luisa liked to do to the kids was that they would go out and buy these like pies, like blueberry, apple, pumpkin pie, and they would put them on the dressers, and the kids, like starving, they can go up to them, they can look at them, they can smell them, but they can't eat them. Why? Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess they really just enjoyed torturing their children. Also, they did not want to they were Protestant at one time, but they decided that they were going to make their own religion. So their own religion was going to be a mix of Mormon, witchcraft, voodoo, and they made it their own thing with this whole apocalyptic thing. I don't know. It was kind of weird. So the kids stayed at home, they got homeschooled, Apparently, they never did anything. The 17-year-old Jordan Turpin, she had the IQ of a first grader, which I think is so sad. And as I said, the 29-year-old Jennifer, she weighed 82 pounds. And this is the weirdest part of the whole thing. They had a 2-year-old. So Louisa got pregnant with her last baby when she was 47 years old. So apparently, the weird thing is that Louisa fed the baby as much as she wants. And the thing is that you can tell too, because there are plenty of family pictures, and these children are really tiny and skinny, and they have this big, plump, juicy looking healthy baby. It looks really odd, and I will definitely throw in the pictures of this. So Louisa used to take her out and get her clothes, and it was the only child who wasn't abused. They have different theories as to why this is. They feel that Louisa enjoyed the babies when they were in the baby state, but once that they started getting bigger, she no longer wanted to have anything to do with them. I guess she was a little bit obsessed with the show Octomom or whatever, and she's like, well, she has 8 babies, I have 13. But she didn't have 13 babies. She had adults that she was keeping hostage, kidnapped, bound, not allowed to leave. Okay, so just some of the things that I want to tell you about before we end is that the neighbors had been asked, did you guys see anything weird? And one of the neighbors that worked the night said he saw that the kids had to march up and down in their house at night. So this was actually proven the way that they were under the radar. The family had become completely nocturnal. They only were up during the night and they slept during the day. And other neighbors had actually saw the kids outside putting sod in the ground at 10 at night. Which I've heard people say, who puts sod in the ground at 10 at night? I think a lot of people do that. But I think it's really odd to have a whole family do that. And then another neighbor saw the kids, the 2 teenage boys, go in the garbage and dumpster dive and start eating food out of the garbage. And then the cops said, did you ever think about calling the cops? And they basically said, yeah, we thought about it, but we didn't. Basically, Louisa had an obsession with Disney and Vegas, which was really strange. They went to Vegas 3 times to renew their vows, and there's live footage of it, and it's kind of bizarre and creepy, and it made people think that they were a normal family, and I just think it's so crazy that they were able to not be seen, and yeah, it was crazy. So Louisa and David, they went to court. They were found guilty of everything, and one thing that was on the charges, which I actually read, was lewd conduct of a minor. And I had actually found out that David, I think it was Jordan, he did it too, but I'm not sure, actually made one of his daughters pull down their pants and underwear and sit on his lap, and he tried to kiss her with the mouth. But other than that, there wasn't really any other talk of sexual assault or anything like that. But I can't see how something like that would have happened and there wouldn't have been any other things. I don't know. I watched a lot of the court footage, and it's very obvious that Louisa and David are mentally ill. That's just my opinion. I don't think it's an excuse, but the way that Louisa looks, there's something not right. And when they were talking about a lot of the things that had been done to the children, it was pretty brutal. They would strangle them and hold them up by their necks and there was one story about how the girl was scared of spiders, and Louisa threw her daughter under the bed because there were spiders under there, and she was screaming, "They're biting me," and like Louisa kept her under there more. So it's weird because when you watch the footage and you see it, you actually start to think like, wow, this family loves each other, because like, you know, when the kids testify against their parents, they say that they don't want them to not ever see them again. But then you hear the stories of what actually happened, and I don't think it's a case of Stockholm Syndrome, because I mean, maybe it is, but it's so sad that these children, adults have they had their lives taken away. They weren't allowed to go out, they weren't allowed to play, they didn't have friends, they didn't get to go to school, they didn't graduate, they didn't do anything. And that's horrible. And, you know, so yeah, I just wanted to talk to you guys about the Turpin 13 because I thought it was a very interesting case, and I hope you liked my first true crime footage. I do want to go ahead and take this time to make mention that there were various neighbors that saw various weird things, and nobody called. No one. And I just wanted to say, if you see something like this where you know, kids are getting locked up, or there was even a report where the neighbor went to the Turpin's house and they saw a baby in a playpen, and the baby was in the playpen for like 12 hours just sitting there. Every time they came up, nobody was playing with the baby. And you know, when they went into the house, they actually did see human waste on the ground where the babies were just left. It doesn't hurt to call. So I just wanted to go ahead and give you that phone number. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-729-7233. I hope you liked this video, as sad as it is. I hear that Jordan is doing amazing, and one of the older boys has actually got a college degree. All the adults are living together in an apartment. They've become wards of the state because they have been so mentally abused that they can't take care of themselves, but they wanted to keep them all together. So they have their own apartments, and the younger children were adopted to two families, so they tried to keep them together as much as they could, and that's really cool. So I guess this is a story of survival, and you know, there's a lot to be learned from it. So Jordan, Turpin, if you're watching this, you inspired me to go ahead and go further into true crime, and I hope you have an amazing life with you and your brothers and your sisters. So yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.